Okay. So, okay, there's 3 people watching, but I'm assuming that's going to bump up once people get my message in Discord. Good morning. What's left of morning? Hello. Okay, I'm gonna see when folks come in, and then I'll give it a few minutes. But those who are here, think about this one while we wait. What I'd like you to do is brainstorm ideas and post them in the chat for a shoot 'em up game without space, aliens, bullets, or spaceships. And if you can, and really try to do this, try to even make it like same action but non-violent theming. So, when we ran this yesterday, a lot of people were like, well, you're a wizard shooting spells and zapping goblins. And it's like, okay, cool. But, can you do even something that's still some projectile being, cast towards other things, but you're not blowing them up. Can you even do that? So people who are here while we wait. Okay. Somebody says shooting cupcakes into customers' mouths at a bakery. I really like that one. T-shirt launch sim. Man, too soon. Too soon after that episode of The Simpsons. It's been, 20 years plus, actually. Pirates harpooning loot. Ooh, I like that one. That's really good. That's really, really good. Okay, let's get a few more. Zookeeper feeding all the hungry animals. Hungry animals. Now, are they hungry animals? Tank shooting basketballs into giant hoops that are far... Ooh, I like that one. See, I like that one, too, because it makes no sense, but it makes a ton of sense. So you're kind of embracing absurdity, which I think is a good thing for game designers to do. Especially, it's something that I really like because as an academic in the game industry, so many things are... in academic game design are those who've taken my games for education course, serious games and stuff like that, and games for addressing issues in the real world. And sometimes it's nice to just make something goofy, which is kind of what I'm doing right now with a few things. So let's see. I smell Game Jam fuel. Well, fun story. Don't forget, Global Game Jam kicks off tomorrow night, 6 p.m. And if you sign up for the Global Game Jam website at Kent State, which I'm going to post in the YouTube chat, I will send you all the link to our kickoff party where we'll have a keynote watch party. So that's tomorrow night at 6. And Game Jam goes until Sunday afternoon at 2. So you have 96 hours this time. That way it's more manageable for people. And if anybody does want to ask any questions, please pop them into the chat. I think that's a good stopping point for some of these game ideas. Little Cuttlefish can shoot ink and venture under the sea. I love it. So yeah, if there's any questions about Game Jam, what is it? Or why should I go? Or we get this one a lot, but I don't know how to game design. Well, welcome to the class. That's what you're here to learn. But also, if you're not feeling quite up to speed on some of the technology parts, who cares? Make a board game. That's all. Make a really cool version of Tag. Game Jam is for all types of games, all people, all types of games. It's inclusive. What is up with my glasses today? Oh, smudges. So yeah, a lot of people are always worried about the tech part, but it's not for tech. It's for creativity. So you don't need to feel intimidated. All right. So why did we do this? Why did we do this creative exercise? Well, the reason is that, so I would like to do Game Jam, but I'm unavailable most days until 5 or 7. You'd obviously want to work that out with whatever team you'd join, but yeah. So one of the reasons I really like Global Game Jam, what they've done this year, the worldwide organization that runs it, they've added extra hours to make it more manageable. And for that reason, because not everybody's available until that time, and also because we're in these like weird pandemic times, it's harder to say like I'm going to distantly be away from real life for like 48 hours like you could in a normal year. So yeah, like I would work that out with your team, but if you pick up a team for the jam and we're allowing people to like form teams beforehand, just like let them know. I've done that before. I've actually had to like go to a family event during Global Game Jam weekend, but I was also in a jam. So like whenever I was not busy with a family thing, I would like go and do some, artwork or something like that. So yeah, it's totally doable. I've seen people do it before. I've done it before. It's all in the spirit of like being kind of open and chill. So, yeah. Anyway, so why did we do this like theoretical game idea thing? Well, the reason is that today we're going to talk about, we're going to really get into our game design discussion today. And to do that, I want to start with the core elements of games and where game ideas come from, or at least one of the versions of where game ideas come from. Okay, here's a slide that says where do game ideas come from? Game ideas come from lots of places, but right now today we are going to talk about specifically rules, mechanics, mechanisms, verbs. Now, you might be wondering why, which, by the way, we're going to look at as regulations or interactions that form a game, and I'll explain this in a second. But why do I have 3 words here? Well, one of the things that I'm going to do throughout these lectures is, one of the things I'm going to do throughout these lectures is show you when there are alternate terminology for things in the game industry. Because what will often happen is you'll be talking to somebody and they will, they'll use a term that's different from the one maybe you learned or maybe the one you operate with. And it's part of like, I want you to be able to function in those environments and be able to think, oh, this person's talking about that concept. So if there is like a few popular terms for something, I'll try to highlight those. For example, there's a term game feel that we're going to be studying later this semester in like April. And, people alternatively call it game feel or juice. And people who've worked on games with me, they've probably heard me flip-flop back and forth between like, oh yeah, if we add that, it'll give it a good sense of game feel. Or, yeah, doing that would really juice that mechanism or something like that. Understand there are multiple words for things, and this is why I try to highlight that. So, rules in games, in the context of games, are regulations or interactions that form a game. Well, what does that mean? First of all, it's like, what form do these take? Well, you're probably thinking of something like this. And that's true. Rules are the things that tell you what you can and cannot do within the context of a game. And like you get a rule book in a board game, and that's kind of like the easy one-to-one thing. But what about code? Think about this. Code is, when you're playing a video game, when you play like basketball, the lines on there's rules that like when you're in a like when you're out, if you shoot the ball from outside a certain line on the floor, you will get extra points. That is a rule of basketball, and it is defined by lines on the ground and some vague concept that tells us like shooting from out here is worth more points. So a rule. So that makes you start to think about like, how am I going to move and position myself on the floor, or how am I going to practice my shots? How am I going to do all of these things that maximize my use of this rule? And likewise, think about in a video game, the rules may not always seem very explicit because it's a sort of like you pop it in and then you just kind of like follow the game logic. But at the same time, the abilities that you code into the characters, the controls of the game, the physics system, these are all things that govern the feeling of rules. So one thing that I like to talk about with games, and this will come up later, and I want to see what you all think, but what do we make it? First of all, let me ask you, what do you think it is that we are making when we make games? To you, when you say I'm going to make a game, what do you think you're making? What do you think you are creating or crafting? And I'll move on when I get at least 2 answers in the chat. Oh man, you got it right away. Blah. I thought it was gonna be I thought I was gonna trip people up with this one. Of course, you've had me in class before, so you've heard me say this. So no, it's all good. That's actually great. That means it's getting through. That's awesome. So somebody said in chat an experience, and that's really important because I'm sitting here with this wall of Pico 8 commands, and if you've never used Pico 8, spend the $15 and learn some Pico 8. It's fun. It's a really cool little game engine / faux computer with some really cool games. The original prototype for the game Celeste was made on Pico 8, and they because it's the anniversary of the original Celeste, Maddie Thorson has just put out like a sequel to not to like Celeste, the thing you can buy on Steam, but Celeste, the Pico 8 game, which is really exciting. So I'm sitting here next to this Pico 8 wall of code to tell you that, a lot of people, when they start making games, are convinced that making games is a technological practice. Case in point, when we hear a lot of people say like, oh, I'm a little nervous about Global Game Jam, they usually think, oh no, I need to be better at the tech tools before I can sign up for something like that. And the thing is, games, I want you to understand, have been in existence since the beginnings of civilization. One of the earliest games, some of the earliest games found were in ancient Egypt, like Senet, or Mesopotamia, like the Royal Game of Ur. So games are very old. And games are really just ways to sculpt an experience that we call play, which you're like, yeah, playing. But, think about this. All games are play, but not all play is games. So playing can be, a kid or an adult twirling around in circles. It can be, subtle interplays of social interaction at a party. Parties, what are those? It can be, a million things that are, moments of unseriousness. But sometimes play can also be serious and help us, work through or understand difficult concepts. There have been examples of children playing at like certain horrible things going around them. That's why we have the nursery rhyme "Ring Around the Rosie." It's a nursery rhyme that kids would play during the Black Plague to make a rhyme about the horrific scenes, to make sense of the horrific scenes going on around them. So play is something human. It's something vital. It's something deep within our species, and games are really the ability to craft and control's a word I don't want to use. Craft and I guess curate that experience. We'll call it curate. Curate's nicer. So there are lots of games, and really, like, if there's a game that seems very open, and somebody said in the lecture yesterday, like a sandbox game, it just means that you really have like a bigger amount of possible things to do, as opposed to, maybe like a game that gives you a very small amount of things to do, like, Galaga or something. And I'm not saying that's bad to be Galaga. Galaga's like an amazing shooter. But Galaga is like one thing, and then Grand Theft Auto is many things. So it can feel more like you're just playing, but even though you're actually interacting with rules, because Grand Theft Auto has a physics system, and it has collision, and it has, the code that makes driving a car happen. So, there are lots and lots of ways to make rules and games and craft play in different types of media. So that's why, like, first thing I want you to understand, game design is not just technology. It's crafting play, and it's curating the experience of play, and that's important because that is ultimately that. If we understand that, we can wield our technology better. So, okay, that's cool. That boils it down, and now you like understand game design, right? Well, no. If I were to tell you to make a set of rules, you'd be like, oh my gosh. You have kind of access to like all of the rules at one time. So that can be very daunting. And we're here to talk about like the core of games and how games begin. Now, again, there's lots of different ways that games begin, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But for right now, let's talk about one way that games begin, and that's coming up with what's called a core mechanic, which is the most basic action that players take in a game. So instead of trying to come up with a whole set of rules, it's usually good to come up with one rule and kind of let the snowball roll down the mountain from there. And this is called by some design by verb, and this is why I said verbs. It's really important. So usually this goes into like come up with one action word, and then that you can like spin off a whole set of game ideas from there. So again, in our chat, I want people to just shout it out. What do you think like the base verb of this game is? And don't worry, this isn't like a quiz. There's going to be lots of different ones people might come up with. Jump. Yeah. Super Mario Brothers is an interesting one, or it's kind of an easy one. But yeah, jump. It is, well, somebody said platforming, but I want you to hold on to that for a second. So, Mario is about jumping. Everything in Mario is about his jump. Now think about that for a second. Because you're like, yeah, Mario jumps and you do it a lot. Case closed, right? Well, how do they make you want to jump a lot? Now just like shoot off some things that are in Super Mario Brothers, any Super Mario Brothers game that make you want to jump, or that reward you for jumping, or that center on jumping. Like what other parts of Super Mario Brothers accentuate the jumping? Somebody says items. How so? So somebody says avoid holes. Yeah. So there's lots of pits in Super Mario Brothers. And so like a lot of the game is centered on avoiding holes, by jumping over them. So somebody said the question blocks and enemies. So the question blocks are you jump under them and they bump and an item comes out. You jump for coins, and the coins are often arranged in arcs that match Mario's jump. Sometimes, if there's a pipe in the sky, you can jump up to the pipe. The arrangement of platforms and enemies that you jump on to kill them. So there's, and then nobody said this yet, but think about the sound effects in Super Mario Brothers. You hear sound effects like boing when you jump. You don't hear like sound effects when Mario's running. You hear sound effects when Mario's jumping. And then a lot of the actions that relate to the jump are also given sound effects. So there's a hierarchy of actions where there's other stuff Mario can do, but the main mechanics are the ones given sound effects, and that's to make those actions stand out and to like kind of trigger the player into doing them more. So game design is a lot of like balancing, the elements of your game, not just the mechanics, but also like learning how sound should work and art should work and things like that. All right, so what is a verb you could use to describe this game? And don't say move. Lots of games have move. I'm looking for something. What is it that you're using the pieces to try to do to the other pieces? Think, sure. What else, though? Capture. Somebody said capture. Yes, this is a game about capturing the opponent's pieces. So if you had a game... So, like, checkers is about capturing. Hold on to strategy. I'm going to explain something about strategy here in a second. So, if you... So, checkers has capturing. But what differentiates chess from checkers is, like, in chess, the different moves... the different pieces move in different ways, and that adds a lot of interest to the game. Now, when... I'll make this point later, but so, chess is about capturing. That's like your core verb, and then everything kind of spins off from there. You make the game more interesting by having more ways to capture and more, different piece types and things like that. So imagine designing chess. You might start with like just the pawn, which is a very simple, very simple piece that moves in a very straightforward fashion, except when it doesn't. But then you kind of keep going and keep going and keep going. And one of the cool things about chess is that, the rules evolve over time through their exposure to different cultures. So in the Middle Ages, that's when you get what looks like the way the queen works now. They call them the Mad Queen rules, when the queen is like the most powerful piece on the board. And, it caused a huge controversy, but it adds interest to the game and drama in, when the queen is, moving around a certain way. Is chess Pokemon? Sure, yeah. Or is Pokemon... Probably Pokemon is chess. So, okay, so let's talk about this one. What is the verb of this game? Because remember, and game design scholars are very good at thinking about video games and board games, but you don't always hear them talk about sports. And sports are games. In fact, I would even argue that, no, because it's not a game about dribbling. What is it a game about? You do dribbling a lot because you're moving around, but ultimately, what are you trying to do? Somebody said dunk yesterday, too. Dunk is one way to do this thing. Throw. But the other games have throwing. What is it that makes basketball basketball, score how? Because other games have scoring. Soccer has scoring, football has scoring, baseball has scoring, cricket has scoring. What is it about basketball? Thank you. Somebody said, yes, you are putting a ball in a basket. So that is what basketball is about. It's about putting the ball in the basket. And basketball was created when, somebody put a peach basket on a wall and was like, put the ball up there. So, yeah, basketball is, yes, it's about shooting and scoring and things like that, but it's about scoring by putting a ball in a hoop. And think about that, though. Ball and hoop, that's step one. Now extrapolate the rest of basketball out from that. It's that, you're ultimately trying to put the ball in the hoop. Well, what are the ways you can do that? You can shoot it. You can throw it, You can throw it from farther away. And that's where somebody said, hey, what if we put this line on the floor, and if you're on the other side of the line, you get more points. So that's game design, is you think, well, let me take this core idea, ball and basket, and then let's kind of go outward, all right? You can throw it in the basket. You can learn to jump real high and dunk it in the basket, which is not really, doesn't get you any extra points. It just looks awesome. You can, then you have like free throws where there's like maybe, if you get bumped in a certain way, you go get 1 point for getting an like uninterrupted shot into the basket. And all of these things come off of that. It's like, well, how do we stop the other team from getting to the basket? And then that's when you like create different, roles of on a team, different positions on a team. And that's, again, core idea, ball into basket, but then everything emanates from that. All the different ways to shoot, all the roles on the team, from like, what are the roles for trying to get it into the basket, or trying to get, trying to get the ball. What are the roles that like defend the basket? What are the roles for like who gets the ball at what time? And then suddenly you have a sport. So one core idea, but it just kind of builds and builds and builds. And that's how games work, and that's why it's important to be able to figure out what the core mechanic of games you're looking at are, because that can tell you whether or not it's really like, doing the thing you want it to do well. So design by Verb. What's this last one? Somebody pointed out that this particular Zelda game could actually have two. I agree. So, I usually go for explore when it comes to Zelda, but somebody pointed out so I used to just have like a shot of Wind Waker on here. But then I try to like update it every once in a while. So I updated it with Breath of the Wild after that game came out. And I love Breath of the Wild so much. But, somebody said, oh, that one could also be survival. I'm like, oh, damn, you're right. But, Zelda in general, we're going to go explore. And everything in Zelda, though, really, again, branches off of exploration. So, and I'm looking at Zelda as a whole series, not just Breath of the Wild. Because, if you play a game like, I'll keep it on Switch, like Link's Awakening, the remake of Link's Awakening, the way that game works, and it's a much more traditional Zelda game, is that you like can explore a tiny area, and then there's sort of like an end point for that tiny area, usually a dungeon, and then in that dungeon you get a tool. And when you come out of the dungeon after having beaten it, that tool expands the amount of area that you can explore. So you actually get more, you can explore like a bigger area once you've gotten this new tool. So the game is based on sort of like coming to the limits of an area, getting a new tool, and then your area expands. And Metroid and Castlevania games are like this as well. That's Metroidvania. But, it all comes from exploring. The idea of like these items mitigating your exploring, and then other things that, like how does the game reward you for exploring? Here's a question for Zelda fans. How does the game reward you for exploring? Is it just that, it's nice to go around? Or is there something else happening? Finding important items, exactly. So, you smash pots, you cut down bushes, and you're going to get hearts and money and, sometimes, again, based on the Zelda game, like a bug or a secret seashell or some collectible. Or if you really explore and solve puzzles, maybe like a piece of heart to expand your life meter. So you want to reward the player's curiosity. That's how you build exploration. You could say the same thing of like Mario Odyssey, but the trick is that Mario Odyssey is placing those rewards for exploration also behind some maybe acrobatic or jumping related challenges, whereas Zelda is more like exploration, puzzle solving challenges. So see, that's how mechanics come off of a core idea. Is you just kind of think, now what all can I do to make this more awesome, and what can I do to really like juice this idea and have lots and lots of interpretations of it. Again, like basketball, where it's like this type of shot gets you 1 point, this gets you 2, this gets you 3. So again, we talked about this. When you're making a game, you are crafting play, you're crafting an experience, and Anna Anthropy and Naomi Clark actually even put it as you're having like a conversation, because the player is interacting with your mechanics that you design, and you're trying to get a sense of like how to have the conversation be really fulfilling, because there's a back and forth between player and game designer. And it's always hard to really... It's important to think of it in this way, because on one hand, you're going to show your game to somebody, and you're going to be standing there, and they're going to be doing it, but you don't want to like have to walk them through that game. You want the game to kind of speak for itself, and you want them to be happy or to have had a meaningful time with your experience that you create. So that's where, it's like the indirect conversation between the player and the game, or in the game designer, through the rules and experience that you build. And it's important to master that, and it's important to iterate on it in controlled environments where you can observe the players. Because what happens when you release your game into the marketplace on Steam, and then somebody in, Russia plays it, you can't jump on a plane and be like, oh, somebody downloaded my game. Okay, get to the airport, jump plane, run to their house and be like, hey, I gotta give you the tutorial, or else you're not going to know how to play. The game has to speak for itself. You have to be like, you have to form your argument and your logic and your guidance through the game rules because otherwise you're going to be trying to get some frequent flyer miles, unless you really, really like frequent flyer miles and can divide into like 7 of you, which that would be cool. Teach me how to do that. So the play and these things are like, it's the things that happen when players interact with mechanics. Remember, all games are play, not all play is games. Sometimes you can just play, and it's just a way to, be in another mode that isn't like serious work. And that's an oversimplification of it. Oftentimes play can be very healthy and serious, if not always feeling serious. But um, play is important as for so many things like in our culture, and in our species, but also play is something that we can craft into an experience that again might bring fun and enjoyment, might teach the player something, might be artistically expressive. So play is really powerful, and that's what we want to learn how to do. And again, it doesn't matter if you know Unreal or Construct 2 or not. You can make play, because play in games existed before that. So I want to go into I want to mention two things as well, and these are important because they actually line up with something somebody said earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up. So two things that rules are not. Rules are not, first of all, the story. Because what happens with a lot of young designers, it happened with me once upon a time, it'll happen with you, or hopefully not, because you'll internalize this. But rules are not story, meaning if I say, hey, what's your game idea? And if you just vomit lore on me about this world you've created and the story of the world and who the characters are and things like that, cool. That's awesome. That's a lot of work. What do you do? That's what I'm usually going to react with, is like, when you make a game, you want to describe what it is you do. Now, there are games that are built on story. We're going to go over them. We're going to make them later in this semester. But, know when you're designing a game, you need to think about what it is that player does in the game. Even if you design from a story, you need to kind of like tie it to a set of mechanisms or mechanics. Otherwise, make a movie, write a book. So first of all, it's not story. You have to think of, like, when you come up with a game idea, even if you don't start from core mechanics, you have to think about what it is you are doing ultimately as an expression of that story. Rules are also not strategy. Now, that's not to say you can't make a strategy game. That's not what I'm saying. When I say strategy, it's when the people that were creating chess sat down to create chess. And that's an oversimplification of it, because chess has evolved through multiple cultures, through, millennia and blah, 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 blah. Millennia? At least centuries. I'd have to look that up. It's a long time. But, they didn't sit down and say, all right, well, we got to work out the Sicilian defense now. All right. They didn't write that down. That is something that, or like the Rui Diaz opening or something like that. I said that one right? No, I didn't. Okay. Rui Lopez. Sorry, my bad. They didn't write that down when they came up with the rules of chess. Rui Diaz is a literary character from another thing. So that's not what is part of the game. What happens is that somebody makes rules of a game, or they make a game, and then they put it in the world, and then people who play the game come up with dominant ways of using the rules, and then that becomes strategy. So that's what a strategy is. It's player-derived things. So you see the same thing when you get, the different types of strategies that players come up with in StarCraft. Or, when I played the X-Wing tabletop game a lot, you'd have different, like, every wave of ships, there'd always be, like, what is the min-max way of dealing with these ships? And then the next wave of ships would usually have a ship that fixed it, meaning that it would, like, dominate that particular strategy. A good example is, like, wave 1, you'd just put a ton of TIE fighters on the table. That's how people would win. Wave 2, the Millennium Falcon comes out and can just, destroy all of those TIE fighters because of how it worked. So, strategies, like when you in modern games, what you see is this sort of like tug of war between game companies and the players of those games, because somebody will come up with a dominant strategy in one of these expandable games. The game company will figure out how to fix it, and then the players will invent new dominant strategies, more Millennium Falcons. Game developers make rules to play the game. Speedruns, 5 ways to abuse or work around the rules to beat the game fast. Yeah, speedrunning is another strategy. And that's not to say strategy is bad. You want there to be strategy. You should want to make a game that people want to dig into and find that. And there is something to be said for designing to predict some strategies, but what the players are going to go for is not going to be whatever, they'll find some of the, maybe the like stuff you plant for them, but they will also find things you don't think about. For example, like Hollow Knight, the designers tried to anticipate ways that the players would, what's called sequence break, meaning that, there's like an order of ways that you would probably access areas by like virtue of what the character's abilities are. And then players came up with like whole other new ones they didn't even predict. And they were like, cool, that's great. Same thing with speed running. Like you can beat Breath of the Wild in like, I don't know what the current record is. It's somewhere around between 20 minutes to like half an hour. But, and the way people do it are absurd and amazing. And you look at it and you're like, that is within the game's system. Holy cow. Basically, they find a way to like shoot a tree across Hyrule from the beginning of the game. And then just like, rocket to Ganon's castle and then march right in. So, like story and strategy are, they are related to rules. They have relationships with rules, but they're not rules. And if you learn where to draw that line, again, this is why we did the exercise at the beginning of like, make me a shooter that's not, space and aliens and bullets. That's why I do it, because it's like, let's see the game for the rules. Let's, see the Matrix. That's a really old pop culture reference at this point. And why is doing that important? Because core mechanics, if you understand how to see mechanics, if you understand how to see games for mechanics, this is where you can make a paper prototype for a game that eventually becomes a video game. So this is where you can like kind of focus on the rules and the experience, and then divorce that from the technology you're using to build it. Technology will allow you to build certain kinds of experiences well, but they can always be abstracted in some other form. Maybe that form on a tabletop is, action and fighting is more like turn and sequence based feeling, whereas in a video game they would be run through like, real-time physics. But you can still, create the feeling of like squad-based combat or something on a tabletop, and then you just, turn it into Team Fortress 2. Is it apparently possible to never climb? Oh my gosh, really? Wow. I guess that would be technically true. Somebody said it's entirely possible to never climb while playing Breath of the Wild. Wow. So this is where prototyping happens, because if you can see experience, or if you can like learn how to mentally see experience and see rules, then form doesn't necessarily matter. You can still build rules and experience. The form is just like a different interpretation of those rules and experience. So this is why, for example, our first project is take a level you like from a game and then boil it down into this like, the experience of choices that are in that level that you experience while in that level. That's what you're doing, is you're deconstructing it into this prototype form, and then hopefully at some point in the future, you'll be like, well, let me think about this level, and then you can use that to build your own prototypes. And test your level even before you sit down and argue with a 3D program. I pick on 3D a lot in these, and the same applies to 2D for sure, but 3D's a good one to pick on, frankly, because the production for three-dimensional games is so high and requires such like human and financial capital to accomplish that it's like, let's find all the ways that you can make it good before spending that. And that's really important in production. The other thing that you can do if you understand this is that, again, and this is closely related to what you're doing, you can take a 3D experience and learn how to boil it down into some other form. So a friend of mine, Jonathan Ying, he's a tabletop designer, and he used to work at Fantasy Flight Games, and he is responsible for the tabletop version of Doom. And if you've never played this, my God, it is Doom. It is absolutely Doom. And he even gets like the visceral feeling of glory kills in there by, you kind of like wear down a demon, through normal shots, and then you can get really close, and then if they're below a certain level of health, you can initiate a glory kill, take that piece off the board, and then you draw a bunch of resource cards, which feels super awesome. It's like that scene in a like poker game in a movie where somebody like takes all the chips and does this. You're doing that with health upgrades. Same thing with like when you get certain weapons, you get to like chain actions. So you can just be like, I'm going to do that, and that. It feels really, it gets that feeling of being Doom guy and, just constantly moving, constantly firing. And it's on tabletop. So if you understand that, you can, kind of go backwards. And that's actually like the mission statement he was given. They were like, no, you've got to match this feeling. And he did. So, again, understand rules, understand experience. If you can learn to recognize those things in games, the rest is just what do you present it in. And this is the same. In fact, I was actually listening to a podcast, the Retronauts podcast. The episode they did last night is on this game, Metroid Prime. And they said this explicit thing about this era of games where Metroid Prime was made. They said the games that made the transition, or the franchises that made the transition from 2D to 3D the best were the ones where the designers clearly sat down with the original like 2D games and said, why does this work? Why does this feel the way it does? And how do we make that feeling happen in this other medium? Because so many other games were, like, let's make a Mario 64 clone, but put Earthworm Jim in it or something like that. And it was like some detraction, like it would have the characters, but it wouldn't be that, it wouldn't have that feeling of that franchise, and those franchises didn't really translate to 3D. Metroid Prime, for all intents and purposes, looks like a first-person shooter, and at times feels like a first-person shooter, but it really more feels like a first-person, it feels like this moody, lonely adventure game, Metroidvania game, just in 3D, and that's why it succeeds. That's why Zelda succeeded. That's why Mario succeeded. That's why Sonic succeeds at times when it remembers that it's a Sonic game. When it's in 3D, that's why Metal Gear, they really just remade Metal Gear 2 when they made Metal Gear in 3D, and it works. So games from that era, that's the ones that could recognize rules and experience and how those interact to make the Metroid or the Metal Gear whatever experience. Those are the games that got it. So I guess, like, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts? as people who play games, where have you recognized these relationships? And do you, I don't know, kind of open-ended. Tell me what you think. Also, I want to acknowledge the brilliance of rip and tear, more like tabletop and tear. If it were rip and tear on tabletop, that's when you'd get one of those like legacy games where you like destroy the set, but that's because it's a linear story. Which would be interesting. Here's a question for you. Have you ever encountered a game that reverse engineer, like that does some of this? Like maybe it's a tabletop version of, because Doom's not the only one out there. There are tabletop versions of video games, and some of them really get them right. Have you ever encountered anything like that? Or think about this. Zelda did a great transition from 2D to 3D. I agree. I love Ocarina of Time so much. Think about this from a historical perspective. Like, think about role-playing games you play, digital role-playing games of any kind. Then think about those of you who play D&D. Think about D&D or any other tabletop RPG. Are those not just tabletop RPGs interpreted in a computer space? Heard from a friend that the Bloodborne tabletop, yeah. So I didn't want to bring it up in case anybody had thought of it, but yes, I've actually had students bring up the Bloodborne tabletop game, same sort of thing. They say it's a really good interpretation of Bloodborne into a tabletop experience. I've heard the Binding of Isaac one is like okay. Rum and Bones is a tabletop that tries to create the feel of a MOBA game. Yeah, that's a. I've seen a few of those. That one could work. MOBA games could really work, I think. In terms of RPGs, like computer RPGs are nothing more than people wanted to play. Like the origin of them was programmers who played D&D and wanted to play D&D without having to do quite so much math. So they made a computer program to do the math, and then invented, the computer role-playing game. That's how we get Ultima. That's how we get, everything coming up through, what we have now. The kind of thing you see from like Bethesda and formerly BioWare. Now they're kind of on hard times, but Mario Party is a board game with mini games. Yeah, like Mario Party is like, let's play this board game, and then do some video games, and then do some board games. So and even like BioWare for a while, when they were kind of more at their height, they would advertise their games as being based on particular like tabletop game systems. One of the selling points of Knights of the Old Republic was it's a D20 based RPG because they licensed the rule set from the Dungeons and Dragons people and then made a Star Wars game out of it. And it's not that you're sitting there rolling D20s, but that numerical logic is what's behind the curtain of, what you're seeing on the screen. So again, it's the same. These are all universal. The technology doesn't matter. So we've been talking a lot about this duality here, mechanics and motif. And, this is a nice, useful one to think about. And I've talked in the past that this is where games come from, is like mechanics or story. So to be clear, Wasn't Cybertruck originally a tabletop game in the 90s? Maybe? I couldn't tell you. I don't know the history of that as well. So motif, of course, meaning like, and I'm just kind of lumping a few things together here, but think of story, theme, characters, world building. That's usually when people think about like coming up with game ideas. They'll either go hardcore mechanics, hardcore story. And, there's a lot of logic to this. Story could be like, I have a story to tell and it's called Final Fantasy VII, and here's the story, and then you kind of work backwards from the story and say, well, and then there can be this stuff called materia, and then there can be this like battle system that's like this, and then there can be, you are in this type of environment for this amount of time, and then that type of environment for that amount of time. And the difference there being that you don't really get to change the story of Final Fantasy VII. It took them making a new version of Final Fantasy VII to change the story of Final Fantasy VII, but you can't go, change the outcome of things. You are always going to have the same cutscenes. But that's the appeal of that kind of game, is that, I remember a roommate in college of mine who really loved Final Fantasy VII being like, yeah, I like it. It's like reading a book. That is a good experience to have during a game. Sometimes you want that. So it's less mechanical, but you're there for the story and the characters, and you don't really want them to change. Or maybe you do, and again, that's where you play the new one. But then you get, by the way, think some of the tweaks in the new one are fun. So, before anybody gets into an argument in the chat, that is where I am. So, theme sometimes is your motif. You want it to be, you're crawling in a dungeon. You want it to be space. Maybe you work backwards from that general theme, and then you make, again, your role-playing game about being a trader in space or something like that. Sometimes you're like, what if we want to make a game where the point is for the people playing it to just make dirty jokes to each other? And I mention this because, like, if you make a game like a Cards Against Humanity, you think it's a card game with, like, mechanics and you can prototype it quickly. But it's actually very hard because the mechanics are very thin and simple. But the actual game is the content, it's the dirty jokes. So, at best, you have to write a bunch of dirty jokes on the card. At worst, you have to source whatever's on the card from another place, which can take time and research and effort, like I did with my Don Quixote game. I was just sitting there with like a version of Don Quixote with all little flags sticking out, and gosh darn it, that was the longest paper prototype I've ever made. Silent Hill is a very theme-based game. Somebody says, when I think of D&D early transition to computer games, I think of Angband that my brothers used to play. Yeah, some of those like older CRPGs. Richard Garriott's like first games that became Akelabeth. Really, the original version of Akelabeth, World of Doom, was just called like D&D 28B, and then he just rebranded it as Akelabeth, and that was it. It was a video game. So really, games can come from a variety of places, though. I can tell you this as an experienced game designer. And what does that look like? So first of all, you have, like, sometimes it's technology. Sometimes you design from technology. I've talked a lot about not designing from technology. But in actuality, designing from technology can be, if you are given the keys to a new console, or you're showing off VR technology, or you have augmented reality, that can be a big part of building this. I actually, give me a minute here. I'm going to, I'll be right back. Okay. Sorry about that. Ah, damn it. Yeah, Professor Potty Break. Well, thank you for being patient with that. See, this is where I learned very early on in my teaching career to allow yourself to appear human in classes, because this type of stuff will happen all the time, where it's like, I need to take a break during the lecture. I had a professor in college that would, when he would like trip over the overhead projector, because he still used an overhead projector, and would like not acknowledge it. And it was just part of a larger pattern of him being kind of a general jerk about stuff, generally just kind of buttoned up and not very like socially agreeable person. And I was like, no, I will never be that guy. So I am, yeah. You just kind of like not take yourself so seriously when you're teaching. And if any of you ever get into teaching, don't take yourself so seriously. So we were talking about technology, and now I can actually not hurry through this. So when you are doing, when you're planning for technology, so the game in the upper right-hand corner is built by some friends of mine. It's called Prom Week, and they are hardcore, artificial intelligence programmers who they're working on this system where they wanted to create a system that would like procedurally generate social scenarios and social situations and have that be the core of storytelling. So it was really, it sounds story-based, but it's really technology-based, because it was building these scenarios out of a bunch of different like societal prompts. So they had to put a game around it, and what was that game going to be? Well, the game was going to be like navigate the week before the prom, right? And so that's really that's an interesting game idea, but it all comes from technology. So that's one scenario where you might use technology. Early Super Nintendo games show off the Super Nintendo. Mario World has a bunch of transparency. It has a bunch of transparent sprites because you could do that. F-Zero had Mode 7 used to make a very fast racer that if you play it now, you're like, this is fun, but can I do multiplayer? No, you can't, because it was really more of a tech demo. That's what Mario Kart is for. If you go and play Super Castlevania 4, there's a level in that game that is just tech tricks. That's it. It makes it really surreal and cool, but they're not a challenge, but they're cool. But that's just like stuff you could do with Super Nintendo. So it's programmers showing off. So, technology is one way you might make a game. It's not very common, but every few years you get something where it's like, oh, let me make a game about that technology. Augmented reality and virtual reality is obviously like the hot thing right now. Like a good example of this that is very fresh is like Half-Life Alyx. You could say that's like, let's make a cool VR game. So economic is another one. Like sometimes you want to make a game that makes money. That's it. So like, where would you encounter that? Hey, our studio got the ability to make Star Wars games, and we have it for 5 years. Let's make all the Star Wars games we can for 5 years and make Star Wars money, right? So it's like, how much of this can we squeeze out? Sometimes you get market research that says a trend among 18 to 24-year-olds is this kind of thing. Great. People make games all the time to get in on trends. The Flappy, like 5 years ago or so, I think, like Flappy Bird, that was a trend. So there, on the mobile market, there were tons of Flappy Bird clones because everybody wanted to get in on that sweet, sweet Flappy Bird ad revenue. And then sometimes like a model for selling a game. I mentioned this game earlier, the X-Wing game, or Magic the Gathering, or Dominion with expansion packs. Sometimes you have a model like that where you're not only making the core game, but you're making the expansions to the game that will add content and maybe make the game more fully realized. The model you get depending on which type of model you're going, or the model you use depending on which type of game you're making might vary. Dominion feels very complete, but if you buy the X-Wing starter kit, it feels very incomplete. Same with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic cards. Those are incomplete. Candy Crush clones, that was another one years ago. So there are economic factors. This may or may not be something that you necessarily are party to depending on where you work. I make games that are almost anti-economical at times where, I just kind of make what I want, but I'm also not living off of my game money. I'm living off of my job money. So that's another situation you could, it depends on your situation. Uniqueness. Sometimes you want to make a game because, and this is kind of related to technology, but it's more of whereas, if you're trying to build some popular technology and show it off, that could be really cool. But, building uniqueness with, sort of one-off experimental pieces is something I have a lot of friends that do. So the game there in the middle is called Luminary. It's a twine, but it's designed by some folks I used to work with, Ann Sullivan, Josh McCoy, and then a bunch of our former students. And the game is that it's a twine, so it's a choose your own adventure story game. But instead of clicking on the links that you're going to go to, you take a piece of thread and then you put it through the loom, and there are sensors on the bottom of the loom that will recognize what color thread you've chosen, and it'll go to that part of the story for you. And what happens is, it's not something that you'd mass market, but it's a cool research project, and then it's a cool art piece because at the end of a game, or at the end of a day showing the game off, they will have a woven scarf of, and the pattern of the scarf is dictated by the choices that the playtesters made throughout the day. It's really cool. Same thing you get with digital, non-digital hybrids, like Johann Sebastian Joust up in the upper right. That's a game where it's a physical game, but you have PlayStation Move controllers. I believe the correct quote is, "I love the Power Glove. It's so bad." Back when we used to say bad to mean good, because the 80s. But the Power Glove was silly, and I love it. So Johann Sebastian Joust, look up this game. Everybody should experience it at some point in their lives. But it's basically it's a dueling game where you end up dancing, essentially. But it's all dictated from a programmed recording of Bach. And you're using PlayStation Move controllers. It's using the accelerometers in there to control who's in and who's out. Sense that. Because it's don't move too fast. And it's not PlayStation dependent either. It can be played on anything. It's just using Move controllers for the accelerometers. And then I gotta hurry up, so I'm just gonna blow through this. Sometimes you're making a game based on a mission. This is serious educational, transformational games. You want to express something, or you want to teach something, or you want to build empathy, or you want to advocate for a group of people. That can be a core element of your game, and everything branches off from that. So let's look at some examples of games that have different mixes of these things. And I'm going with like 2 at a time, but really you can go 3, 4, whatever. All games will probably have some mix of these things. Games for education, exactly. So, Papers, Please is a game that has a mission. It's about having a conversation about fascism. But it's also heavily based on this motif and, this story world of this like fake fascist country. But then you think about real fascism and think how unpleasant it is. And then from there, mechanics get rolled into it and it becomes this like absurd resource / time / sanity management organization game. But everything spins off of this mission and setting, right? If you're making a game like a Pokemon Go style game, you're working with uniqueness and technology. It's about AR and it's about making a unique mix of real world action dictated by AR. So everybody knew their neighborhood better and could find all the public art in their neighborhood because they played Pokemon Go, or really because the people who played that one that came before Pokemon Go, the Google Niantic. Oh, wait. What was that one called? So Niantic's the company, but they made a game that was really just like what Pokemon Go was. Anyway, so that game is unique and it makes you get out and engage your surroundings through technology. So there's a mix of technology and uniqueness here. Not all these, you have to be careful with these mixes. Sometimes you want to make tons of money and be unique, and you come up with stuff like this, like Pie Face, which is a game that is stupid. But this is kind of what Hasbro's doing now, is they're just trying to make these really novel things that are barely games, but that are unique and gimmicky enough that people get excited about them. Really, it's all just extrapolate. Here's a good example of learning how to pull out the core of games and really see what these games are. All of these games are operation. It's all don't do a thing, perform a task, but try not to screw up the task, because then a thing will happen. That's what all these games are. Mousetrap, Operation, Don't Wake Daddy, Pie Face. There's one about poop now. That's what Hasbro's kind of money making is right now, and that's that's a thing. That's a thing people do. But sometimes games are based on this. But so all of these reasons, all of these things are ways that people would come up with game ideas. But really at the center of all of them is making a good player experience. Everything is based on player experience. And as Tracy Fullerton says at the beginning of your textbook, the role of the game designer is first and foremost to be an advocate for the player. Everything is based on building a good experience and building good play. There were Pokewalkers that I jump inside for. Oh no. Poor Miltank. The game designer must look at the world of games through the player's eyes. So it is our job to, again, we are having that conversation and we want the player to have a pleasant conversation. And I'll leave you with this thought. I'll leave you with this example. So there's a game that came out of a studio I was involved with years ago. I didn't work on this game, but it was called Factitious. And Factitious is it's a trivia game about news. And this was before fake news was as big a conversation, but it was a game about fake news. And you were supposed to swipe left or swipe right. Yes, it's based on Tinder. What real news is and what's fake news. So that was it. And you got a score. Okay. Cool. Great. So it's a trivia game, and you get a score, and you get points. This is also a trivia game. This is bar trivia. Back when we could have bar trivia. Or I guess the 2020, 2021 version of this is playing Jackbox, right? With your friends over Zoom. And, so bar trivia is it's trivia with points, but it's fun. It's better. It's better than games that just kind of give you a quiz. And why is that? Why do you think that is? And I know that we're over time, but just bear with me here. Why is that? Why is this? What's the difference between these things? What is one designer focused on versus the other? I've given you the answer already. The answer was in the slides before this part. What did it say on the blue square? No? Well, maybe. Okay, well, so I got two interesting answers. One is focused on competition, cooperative, and competitive. It's about socialization. There's no game to bar trivia. It's questions and puns and beer. And it has economic things because people the bar owners want people to come in and buy lots of beer and snacks. But in terms of actually going and why people arrange bar trivia nights is because it's really an excuse for you and your friends together, get some drinks and be silly and laugh about jokes. But then you're also kind of and that happens around a game. And that, that's board game night also. But it works because you're building the experience of what is happening interpersonally between the players. What's happening on the left is that somebody applied a scoring system to saying what's good and what's bad and put it on an app. It's a scoring system and a piece of technology. And there's going to be people that tell you that's game design, and it's not game design. Or it's at least very shallow game design. It's badly implemented game design. But there's nothing really rewarding about playing this game because it doesn't make it social. It doesn't build a sense of fun or play. It only rewards you in the most meager of ways. And, the graphics aren't even that, you could say the same thing about something like Duolingo, but Duolingo at least has, cool animations, right? This doesn't even have that. So player experience is that central thing. That's the secret sauce. You can tell when somebody just made something nice on technology, and that's what we don't want to do. We want to make something meaningful. Not going to go over that. We're past time, but read MDA Framework. It's a nice system for understanding games that'll get you started in game analysis. I don't agree with everything in it, mostly related to the aesthetics part, but don't worry about it. Read the framework. And I'll leave you with this. Jason Morningstar, designer of Fiasco, came up with this term that I think is really cool for this space between the game and between players that you fill with meaningful content called the Fruitful Void, which is where, think about, again, if it's the player experience, if it's getting friends to talk, if it's getting somebody to enjoy a good story, if it's getting somebody to practice skillful use of your game mechanics and get that one more. That's all filling the world around the game with something good. That's why it's called the Fruitful Void, is because there's this void when you start designing that is your job to fill with good content. What is it that you're going to fill? What is it that you're going to fill that with? Is it education? Is it meaning? Is it poetry? Is it personal reflection? Is it competition? Is it laughter? Is it a story? Is it people coming up with a story? That's up to you. And that's what games are about. So that's it. I've held you on for long enough, but thank you for bearing with me. Sorry for the break in the lecture there earlier, but let me know what you think. Feel free to discuss some of this stuff on Discord. Let me know if you have any questions about the project. I hope understanding like how to pull rules and play out makes things clearer for the project. And if it doesn't, again, reach out on Discord. I'm happy to chat. But have a good one. Goodbye. Be safe.